I want to talk about 9/11, September 11th, 2001. I joined the Army in 2004. I joined as an intelligence analyst, and interestingly enough, I tried to join before that, but let's rewind the clock and talk about, where everybody has a different story on where they were. This is one of those events that you remember exactly where you were, that it's almost like post-traumatic stress disorder. You can relive that moment. You know all the details. And September 11, 2001 was Tuesday morning. I was in Miami Southridge Senior High School, and I was in the social studies class. Now, the classroom that I was in, we didn't have an actual social studies teacher. It was a coach. I can't remember his name, but the coach was acting as the social studies teacher, and essentially the classroom wasn't even a classroom either. It was a part of the hallway that they partitioned off. Like they put like some temporary walls and kind of made it a room. Like it didn't have a door, so the temporary walls created like a turn where you kind of came into the room by coming around a corner of these temporary walls. And it was just a makeshift classroom because they were running out of space and they needed that class and they didn't have a teacher, so they added this coach. So in the mornings, I don't remember if it was every morning or I think it was every time we had the class, that the first 5 minutes of the class would be spent doing. He would show a pre-recorded news clip, so something he recorded from the night before. So coach would have us write down, these different things from the news, like 5 facts or whatever, and then pick a random student to have them briefed to the class. So that morning on September 11, 2001. He forgot to record. He forgot to record a session. He forgot to record it at home, so he didn't have anything prepared that morning. So he decided that he was going to instead just watch the news live. So he pulls the TV out. He plugs in the cable cord into the wall, and he turns on the TV. And sure enough, we see one of the, I don't remember which tower, with the smoke coming from it. And just a few seconds later, the second plane hits. And everyone is in shock. And I remember some kid going, and he said, "What movie is that?" And coach looked at everybody, and then we all were just kind of staring in disbelief. And he just said, "Everybody go call your parents right now." And everybody ran out the room, and it was just chaos. The whole school, everybody was running out of their classrooms, and everybody ran down to the phone booths. And kids who had cell phones were grabbing their cell phones, and people were just going absolutely insane. It was just crazy. So I decided it wasn't made any sense for me to go ahead and call anybody. I just decided I need to get out of here. I need to walk out of here. So I just walked right out the front door and started walking home, because everything was nuts. It was absolute insanity. The streets, people, like traffic it was just absolutely nuts. A little added background. I grew up in New York. I grew up in the Bronx, and most of my family lives in New York. So as I was walking home, what started to go through my head was anybody there? One of my uncles is a police officer, and he's stationed down in Manhattan, and that was going through my mind. Then it started to click. There were some other things. I had one of my uncles was a fire marshal in one of the buildings. And so I'm freaking out. I'm panicked. I get home. Everything's in disarray. And, my uncle, who was the fire marshal, he ended up evacuating his, I don't know if it was his floor or whatnot. And then after getting everybody to safety, he decided that the best way for him to get out of the city, because everything was completely in disarray and there was just people everywhere and the roads were closed and it was just chaos, he decided to go. He used to be a train conductor for the New York Transit Authority. So he went down into the subway and started to walk from Manhattan down through the tunnels, like headed in the direction of the Bronx. This is around the time that the building collapsed, and then he was stuck in a tunnel in the dark. And he walked from Manhattan to the Bronx and showed up at my aunt's house probably about a day later. It took him a whole day to get home. And when he got there, he was covered in soot, which meant he was probably covered in, the pulverized bodies of people. And he didn't say a word. He just walked into the house, walked into the room, and went to sleep. And I think he slept for like a whole day. And he was traumatized by that event. I'm sure it sticks with anybody. In addition to that, my uncle, who was a police officer, he was a first responder down in the World Trade, and thankfully he's all right. But I'm sure they were all affected by, breathing in toxic, some of the things that were in the air, and there's a bunch of other things, including the trauma of the experience and just stress and numerous things that will affect them for the rest of their lives. In addition, one of my cousins, who ended up becoming my roommate later on, she had a job interview. Now, this is very interesting because of her personality. She is the type of person where, she can be a little flaky. I love her to death, but, sometimes she shows up a little late. And so, she can, there's a little bit of less than reliability. But for the most part, she's a great person. But, like, sometimes she can just kind of be, she said she was going to be there and she wouldn't be there. Or you try to call her or text her, she's not going to answer you right away. Like, that's not the person you call right away when you're having an emergency. But it just so happens to be that day, that personality trait, that little quirk of hers actually, benefited her. It may have saved her life. She had a job interview on the 90th floor or something and slept through it, and then woke up and found out the whole world was different. So following this event, everything was really, in flux. We went to war with Afghanistan, and numerous things were happening. I decided that I wanted to join the Army. Like, within a week's time or whatever, I was talking to a recruiter and I was ready to go. First, I tried to join the Marine Corps, and there were some obstacles to that, so I went over to the Army recruiter, and the Army recruiter was like, yeah, you're kind of going to run the same things. I was trying to join the infantry, and in my mind, it was like Marines, or, a lot of family members of mine were Marines. And so I wanted to join the Marine Corps, and then they told me there was a couple of issues. I'm flat-footed, I have asthma in my history, and they were like, nope. I went over to the Army for the same thing. They said the exact same thing. So, nope, that wasn't happening. So, ultimately, that kind of just went away. And my original dream in life, like, I had a real solid, I don't know if it was a solid plan, but I definitely had a plan. My goal was to move to New York after high school. Well, I was in college yet, figuring out the whole college thing. But I was going to move to New York following high school and save up some money to eventually actually go to Canada. I wanted to go to Second City, which is a famous city for improv. Very famous people on Saturday Night Live all got their start there. Mike Myers, Will Ferrell, just tons of people. And I was studying improv. I had books on it, and my father bought me books on improv. And my goal was to get noticed and get on Saturday Night Live and be a writer and maybe do a Weekend Update. That was what I wanted to do, and I had a very clear path. Whether that was going to work out or not, that's what I wanted to do. And 9/11 completely changed that. 9/11 changed my perspective completely, and I thought, I don't know what's going to happen in the world, and I don't know if that's feasible. New York's going to be different. Maybe the culture's going to be different. Who knows? And I thought things are going to get hard, and I don't really have a choice. Several people in my generation had all joined the military, and I saw that as a viable option. So that initial join was out of pure, it was hasty and it wasn't really thought out. But after a while, I was like, man, I really do want to do that. So following high school, I got into weightlifting, and I was trying to get my things up. And I had spoke to a recruiter, and I was like, hey, is there a possibility that maybe we can revisit this? Like, what can I do? Like, my flat feet isn't that big a deal, and I can get over my asthma or whatever. And that wasn't an option. That was not an option. So I graduated high school in 2003. Or rather, I graduated in 2004. In 2003, the Iraq War kicked off. And once the invasion of Iraq happened, they realized that manpower was extremely limited. And so, I graduated high school in 2004. And, or was it 2003? I can't even remember now. I think it was I think I did graduate in 2003. And so the Iraq, well, yeah, that's correct. And so I went to school. I started going to Miami-Dade College, and I was going to school for writing because I figured that would be, what to do. But my dad wanted me to go to school for criminal justice. So I was taking criminal justice courses that I really didn't want to take, but it seemed like a viable plan considering the way that the world was headed. And I was like, I don't know that my dream is going to happen. And so I was, letting other people's opinions and letting events in the world impede on my dreams and my goals. And I was just doing things that I didn't want to do for reasons that I shouldn't have. And ultimately, I got a job working at Hollywood Video. So I actually applied for the wrong position. I applied for the wrong position because when I filled it out, it had like this weird, it wasn't online or anything, and it wasn't a paper. There was a weird kiosk, and the kiosk had questions, and it asked, what would you like to be? Would you an actor or a director or whatever? And so I was like, yeah, director, that's what I want to be. And turns out that meant that I was applying for the management position. So after filling out the application, they called me. I did my interview, and apparently I did really well. And they said, "Wow, you're so young, and I'm so surprised that you would think to apply for the management position." And I kind of like inside, I was like, "Wait, what?" And I tried not to let that be physical. And they were like, they asked me, they said, "So you did apply for the management position?" And without skipping a beat, I said, "Yes, I definitely did." And so that wasn't true at all, but I was not going to let them know that. So I said, "Yes, that is exactly what I did," and I got the job. So I wasn't the full manager, I was the assistant manager. But after about 4 months there, the manager announced their retirement, and they were interviewing people for the management position. And since I was the assistant manager anyway, I became the de facto manager until either they found another manager or until I could get the position officially. So I became the manager, and even though I was still being paid as the assistant manager, and that kind of became a thing for a while. I was getting sort of mistreated in that sense because I was doing the job of the manager, but I was only being paid as the assistant manager. And then after doing that for about 2 months, they announced that they were bringing somebody else in from somewhere else as the manager, and I was going to work for that person. And he was awful. He was absolute awful. And it was a stab in the back. I was like, I gave a lot to this, and I've done really well, and like there's not a lot of people that have made these leaps and bounds. And then here comes this manager who was threatened by me because I guess he was vying for a district manager position and he didn't get that, and he was just very very bitter guy. And I got the call about a month left. They were dealing with this guy. Like it was really awful. Like he was just abusive to everyone, man. He very much so. And I got the call one day that because of what happened in Iraq, because of the invasion and manpower, that, hey, those old rules, those are gone. Like, no problem. You got asthma, you got flat feet, doesn't matter, come on down. Like, it did not matter. So they called me up and they said, hey, all that stuff's waivable. You want to go to the Army? And I was like, yes. Because not only was I working at Hollywood Video, I was also in school, and I wasn't doing that well. My parents had a car. I didn't have my own car, and my sister was going to school. She was in elementary school. Both my parents worked, and we shared one car. So we were literally like, it was getting up super early to take one person to work and then drop that person off, and we were all sharing the car. And like, this was something that was ongoing. I was going to school during the day, and then I was closing. I had to drive from South Miami to Kendall to go to school because I was going to Miami-Dade Kendall campus. And then my dad worked at Home Depot down in Cutler Ridge, which is now Cutler Bay. And then my mother worked at this big building called PRC, which was like it was a call center. And that was also in Cutler Ridge or Cutler Bay, right by my job. So like we would, I parked my car, one of us would walk over and get the car, and we were all just, pick up this one, pick that one, and just like it was constant back and forth. So somebody had to go and pick up my sister at 3 o'clock, and then somebody had to go and pick up my dad when he got out of work at 5 or whatever. And then I would have to close the video store, Hollywood Video, and it would be like 1 o'clock in the morning that I would get out. And this was just awful. Like there was no free time. It was nothing but work, and school, and it was just a drag. And I was doing really well at work, but I wasn't doing really great at school. And I started to notice that this is probably what's going to happen. I'm probably going to end up dropping out of school, and then I'm going to end up doing this job and doing this for a while, and then who knows where that's going to lead. And then maybe I'm going to make that my priority. And then it's like your goal is to become district manager of this video store. And that's just not what I wanted in life. And I saw other people that would do that, and they're a manager, and then they become a manager, and then that just suddenly becomes your life inexplicably. And I didn't want that. And so the first opportunity to get out, I was gone. And it was probably the best decision. I mean, it's definitely the best decision I ever made at the time, because Hollywood Video ended up going out of business shortly thereafter. They ended up going bankrupt. Turns out that manager was stealing. It was a lot of drama, a lot. And it sunk, that ship sunk fast. And when I left, I quit mimicking a scene from, it's a video store, right? So I decided to mimic a scene from Half Baked on my way out. So what I did initially was, he scheduled me for like 2 shifts back to back, like 16 hours to do inventory or something, which was not legal and not like good at all, while he was off like smoking weed. Like he was also a pothead. And I was like, dude, what the hell? So instead, like he'd already done this to me before, and I guess they did something wrong and they needed to do something again, or I don't remember, or maybe it was like when he first came in, they did inventory, and now we were doing inventory for like annually or whatever. And so I was like, dude, he's doing this again, after I told him like that's not right. This is like, and he's again super abusive and trying to like, you know, exert power. So ultimately I said, instead of going against it and fighting, I was like, yeah, absolutely, I'll do it. And you know what? I got it. And he was like, essentially, he wanted me to pull these shifts because he was supposed to, that's what it was. He was supposed to pull one shift, like I think it was in the morning, and then I had the evening. But he wanted to go to the beach. He wanted to go to Fort Lauderdale and go to the beach. And so he's basically, I'm going to schedule you twice so I can go to the beach, which was absolutely awful, right? So I said, you know what? No problem, man. Yeah, I got this or whatever. And he was like, oh, you're not even going to contest it? It's like, no, man, you know, I really just, you got it. I got this. And when he took off, I said, yeah, man, I'm not doing that. And as soon as he was gone, like I opened up the store late on purpose. Mind you, I was 18, so like I was like done with this. I was like, no, you know what? I'm closing this thing down, and like I opened it late so that way he would get the notification later on, but I waited till, I closed it. So I closed the store early, but I waited till he already told me he was in Fort Lauderdale. So he had drove 45 minutes out of town, got all nice and settled, and that's why I'm like, screw this. I'm gonna close up shop. So I literally walked around the store, and I started knocking off like tapes off the video. At the time we still had VHS. We were converting to DVD. So like. I think the last movie that we had on VHS and DVD was like Pirates of the Caribbean and The Lord of the Rings. And so we, the first Pirates of the Caribbean, by the way. And so, you know, I went and started like knocking off some of the displays or whatever off the thing. And then I was like, I walked over and I walked to the front desk and I was like, and I looked at this one guy that came, he was a regular, and I was like, you're cool, and you. I'm out. And I walked out the door. And then I text the other guys like, hey, are you coming with me? And they didn't want to do that. It was major drama. He ended up having to come back from Fort Lauderdale and open the store up. And it was just this wild thing. He was like, well, this guy just walked out and quit. And it was just crazy. And a bunch of us walked out. Like there was a few of us. It wasn't just me. It was a few of us that walked out. But there was one guy that he wasn't willing to do it. And I've got other stories about that guy's name was Jonathan. And I don't want to blow his spot up, but he was a good guy. But he just, oh no, it wasn't just John. It was also Dave. I forgot about Dave. Dave was my boy, but Dave needed the cash, man. He was going through a lot. He was taking care of, his sister raised him, and he was living with his sister. Like something happened to their mom when he was younger. And so his sister, I remember David Foster. He was a good guy, man. I haven't spoken to him in years, but his sister was raising him, and he was living with her, helping her out and her kid, and you know he was helping pay bills, and he's like, dude, I need this job. So I don't know what happened to him after that, especially considering that business went bankrupt. But he was a hardworking dude, and I remember he was a real close friend. Me and him became real close. But anyway, I got the phone call, and they said, you can join the Army. So in October of 2004, I was gone. I shipped out, and I went to, where did I go? I went to Fort Jackson, South Carolina. And they had a reputation amongst other people for being called Relaxin' Jackson. And they hated that. So it wasn't, because they did everything that they could to make sure that they didn't have that stigma, and it was above and beyond. So it was no easy thing, but everybody thought that Jackson was easy because it wasn't an infantry training. It wasn't an infantry training regiment. It wasn't, or rather, for the base. There wasn't their primary focus. They had other MOSs, and because females and males trained together. So in infantry units at the time, it was only males. So they kind of just saw that as, they're weak. And there was all these rumors about stress cards and all these things, and they couldn't yell. None of that was true. Absolutely none of that was true. And so it was difficult. And in fact, a lot of the stories that I knew from people who went to Fort Leonard Wood and went to other different bases, and some of the stories that I told them, they were like, dude, what? We didn't go through that. So they had a reputation, like the quote relaxing Jackson thing, and they hated it. So they really went out of their way to break that moniker and to that stigma, to get rid of it. So that was not true, not even in the slightest. So in addition to that, I joined the military, during that time, and the whole world was a completely different place. I think a lot of people don't realize what that did. And I was probably the least likely person to join the military prior to that, but there were elements involved. Some people will tell you there's only one reason that they join, like, oh, I'm a patriot, or I'm this. I definitely became more patriotic after 9/11, and lots of people did. I felt like not just my country was attacked, but my home. I grew up in New York. That's where my family's at. I felt it was personal in a sense, and I also didn't have a lot of options. Going to school wasn't the easiest thing. I didn't have a dorm. I was at home. It didn't feel like I was in college. It just felt like I was still in high school. And then all the people that I saw in high school, they were there too. So it didn't feel like what people talk about college and going to, dorms and being on campus, and none of that. It just felt like being a super senior, I guess, like a fifth year of high school. I was like, this is not at all what it should feel like. And then I'm working, and it's just worse. And I just felt like this is not where any of this should be going. And so when I got the opportunity, I was gone. And then now in the military, I get some of those things that I was told the college was going to be about. I got, I got to travel the world. I got to, living in the barracks. I had this dorm experience, and other people that are young, and we're all getting exposed to different things. And you just meet all these incredible people from all over the country. And it was just exactly what I needed. Some people, they reinvent themselves. And I think for me, being in the military gave me the sense of confidence to be myself, not to create a new person, just to finally be a little bit more open with who I was in general. Because I was always that way with people that I trusted. But now I could just be that way all the time. And it just allowed a different perspective for me. And in addition to that, being the type of person that wouldn't have done that before, I wasn't in the best shape. I wasn't, I didn't play sports in high school. I tried to play baseball, and I got selected for the team, and I honestly wasn't even that good. I think I played second base, and I wasn't that great. And in addition to the fact that I wasn't that great, I could hit well, but I wasn't great at second base, and honestly, my heart wasn't in it because I just, at that time in life, I was just very lost. There was a lot of things that I was going through personally. I'd lost my great-grandfather and my great-grandmother died back-to-back, and then my cousin died in a tragic accident. She was in a car, and her friends were driving a little recklessly, and she was ejected from the car, and she was the only person not wearing her seatbelt, and she passed away. And so I tell everybody, wear your seatbelt, and that became a very personal thing for me. So I don't allow anybody to get in my car without putting a seatbelt, and I always wear my seatbelt even if I'm moving the car 2 inches. It's kind of it's just a thing, and that was really hurtful. She was just a little bit older than I was, just a few months. We were close as kids. Her father and my mother were raised as brother and sister. They were actually cousins, but they were raised as brother and sister because my great-grandparents decided that some of their children weren't capable of raising their own children, and so they raised them, and didn't exactly be honest with their heritage until later. Like, oh, by the way, you're old enough to know now that that one lady that comes around is your grandma, and I'm actually that's your mom actually, and I'm actually your grandma, and that's actually your grandfather, and those kids that you call brother and sister are actually all your cousins, and you all have different parents. Sorry. So it's a very confusing thing, but I'll talk more about that on my book. But that's neither here nor there. The main thing was I was going through so much internally. I'd never dealt with death like that personally, and it was back to back to back. Within a few months, my grandmother passed away first, my great-grandmother. She had Alzheimer's, and then she ended up passing. She was 90, I think she was 99 years old. And yeah, she was 99. She was almost 100. And my grandfather passed away about she died in February, and he passed in that December. And then my cousin Christina passed away in May of 2001. So they both passed away, my great-grandfather and great-grandmother, in 2000, and then my cousin passed away in 2001, just before 9/11. And I always thought about that too. Like, had she actually seen 9/11, like, she would have been devastated, man. And she probably would have joined the Army also, because, you know, she loved New York more than the rest of us did. Like, she identified with the city. Like, she just had a vibe, man. I remember her, and I remember that being very difficult. For a long time, that was very hard. Like, it's just, I didn't imagine, you know, what that could be like. And she had just come down and spent the whole summer with us before, and like the year before. And just before she passed, she called my mom and asked if she can come visit her. And my mom was like, yeah, whenever you want, you can come. At the time, my mom was like out of it because her parents had passed away and she hadn't recovered yet. And the holidays especially were really bad for her. And so my mother was like, yeah, you can come, and, you know, that'd be great. And my cousin was like, all right, I really need to get out of town. And she didn't get a chance. Like, right around that time, we were making, you know, she was making, I guess, efforts or trying to coordinate something, and then the accident happened. And it was really bad. We ended up not being able to take the whole family up for the funeral. Only my mom and my aunt, who is my mom's cousin, but actually her quote-unquote brother, who is actually her cousin, his actual biological sister, that he doesn't actually consider his sister because he wasn't raised with her, so he thought that was his cousin. So my mom is his actual cousin, but they were raised as brother and sister. And then here's his biological sister, who he was raised believing was his cousin. So he was close with her, but it was a different thing. Like, if he says my sister, he's not talking about he has two biological sisters, and he doesn't really refer to them as his sisters. He just calls them by name. And there was some drama with the other sister, which I won't get into, but ultimately it was not a good thing at the time. And so we wanted to make sure that at the very least my mother and his sister would go up there. Like, well, his sisters, you know, his biological and, you know, raised, that they would go up and see him, more importantly than anyone else. And so that's what happened. They went up to the funeral and whatnot. And those things had a profound effect on the trajectory of my life, 9/11 plus these other things. And I realized that I needed, you know, I guess, you know, backup plans, or I needed to have something that was a little more solid than this, you know, seeming fantasy of going to Second City and becoming, you know, discovered and being on Saturday Night Live, even though I absolutely believe to this day that I would have crushed it and been awesome. So if Lorne Michaels, if you're out there, if you're listening, let me audition. What's up? Pull a Donald Glover. But interestingly enough, all of that happening, the craziest journey started to begin. Like, that was the trajectory of my life was completely altered, and in the best possible way. But nobody ever joins for one reason and one reason alone. And I joined because I'm a patriot. I joined because, you know, I felt personally invested with what happened to New York City, and to what happened to the United States of America. And I needed school money. I knew that going to school, that the Army would pay for it. I knew that I needed a skill. I needed a job. And this time I approached joining the military in a different way. This time when I went to my recruiter, I initially, again, went to the Marine Corps and told him that I had a job in mind. So I was always fascinated with, and I played Metal Gear Solid as a kid. And so Metal Gear Solid, Metal Gear Solid 2, Sons of Liberty, like, those games were out at the time, and those, like, Metal Gear Solid 2 was my game. Like, I learned about the Defense Intelligence Agency, spies. I learned about all this stuff from this game, and I, more so than, like, and I've watched James Bond, and that's MI6 and stuff like that, but this introduced me to, you know, United States of America, you know, special forces, military, Green Berets. This introduced me to CIA, DIA, the dynamics of those organizations, the NSA, like all these different things. And that's what I wanted. I wanted to become an intelligence analyst. I wanted, or rather, like at the time, I think it was counterintel. I wanted to be a counterintelligence agent, and I wanted to be like that. Like I wanted to, go special ops, be a Green Beret, and eventually work, for these 3-letter agencies, the CIA, DIA, and like that seemed so cool to me. Like I wanted to be the American equivalent of James Bond, like this, like Jack Ryan type deal. And the recruiter was like, you don't want that. You want to be a 96 Bravo, which is a 35 Fox now. But he was like, it's an intel analyst. And I was like, what? And so he said, have you ever seen the movie Spy Game? I said, yes, with Robert Redford and Brad Pitt. He says, well, Brad Pitt is the guy you're saying you want to be. But Robert Redford's his boss. He's the guy that's pulling all the strings. You want to be Robert Redford. And I was like, all right, I guess that sounds cool. What it was that they were really pushing for intel analysts at the time. And because of that, they were really pushing hard. Like, they were trying for intel anyway, but, like, I had a really good ASVAB score, and my GT score was over 110. I think I had 120. Yeah, I had 120 GT score. And anything above 110 can guarantee you any job you want. So they were pushing for that stuff, and so that's great. But mind you, I went over to the Marine Corps first. So I go to the Marine Corps, and they were like, yeah, we don't guarantee jobs. It's needs of the Corps. And I was like, I'm sorry, what? Like, I don't guarantee my job? They're like, nah. So I can qualify for all this stuff, and then you tell me I could end up being a cook? And they were like, well, like, nope, never mind, I'm out. So I go right next door, and I went to the Army recruiter, who was also a friend of the family. And I remember it was Segovia, Sergeant Segovia, Staff Sergeant. And, yep, he said, is that what you want to do? And I said, yep. I said, he's like, this is unheard of. Most people, like, we talked them into it. Or like, I was like, no, I had a disc. My uncle was a recruiter for the Marines, and I looked up the jobs that he had. He had his recruiters, and like he knew if I had a disc that had the 250 jobs on it, and I looked it up, and I knew exactly what I wanted to do. And it was initially the counter intel, but the intel analyst was also, I knew about it, and I was cool with that. And since they were pushing it hard, he said I'd get a bonus, and I was like, deal. So you're going to pay me extra just to take that job? You got it, bud. So that's what I did. And I took that, and I thought, I'm definitely going to do all this cool guy stuff, which didn't exactly happen. I've definitely done some cool stuff, but it's one of those things that you can't tell anybody about, right? Because you have a clearance, and then you're obligated to do things. So I would say it's 90-10 principle, right? So 90% monotonous and completely boring and just whatever and mundane. And then 10% fucking awesome, and you can't tell anyone that. And it's just like, man, all right, you can keep it to yourself. So got some great memories, got some good experience, and ultimately, I figured I was set up for success. Right after I joined the Army, I think on one of the flights that I was next to a captain who was on his laptop, and he was a reserve captain, and he was a contractor. And I learned very early on, I think this was right after I got out of AIT. I was on my way to Germany. That was my first duty station. And the guy's sitting there talking about how much money he's making, and I overhear him, and I look over at me. He goes, are you in the service? I think I was wearing my dog tags. I was super obvious. Like, I was that kid, right? I obviously had, like, a high and tight haircut and my dog tags on. And he's like, what's your MOS? I told him. And he said, oh, yeah, you made a good choice, kid. When you get out, he says, get out as soon as you can and become a contractor. He said, I'm making $300,000 over in Afghanistan to do nothing. And I'm like, wow, that's awesome. Well, when I went to AIT and I joined the Army, they flooded the market with intel analysts because obviously they put a hard push. So a platoon is supposed to be anywhere between like about 30 people. So you have a squad that's anywhere between 4 and 5 people, and then 4 squads make up a platoon. So platoons can be anywhere between like 15 to 30 people, right? And each company would probably be made up about 3 platoons. And, 3 times 30, you're talking at max push, if you were doing this, you're talking like 90 people in a company, right? That's feasible, anywhere between that and maybe 100. So we had 106 soldiers in AIT in our platoon. All right? We had 4 platoons in this company, and all 4 platoons were 100+ people. This was insane. You imagine having a squad of 25? Like, this is crazy, right? So it was absolute insanity, and I guess the Army's mindset was, we're going to put an intel analyst at every layer of the Army, like every single unit, right down to the squad, to the team level is going to have an analyst. That didn't work out. It didn't actually make a whole lot of sense either, but the Army's reactive. So instead, they ended up having like a lot of people, and you had entire MI groups, entire MI brigades, and just it's overstuffed, which then led to a lot of an influx of contractors and government employees, which then caused the pay to go down. So when I got out, my first job in 2012, I think the pay when I started was $72,000. I was a cyber threat analyst supporting DIA, and at the time, nobody knew what cyber was, nobody really knew how it fit into the intel picture anyway. But that was a good thing for me, because then I started learning a lot about that, and I made myself more valuable. And now I have cybersecurity certifications, and now I have training in that. And I've been referred to as a unicorn, because I have intelligence analysis experience, information operations experience, and I was actually certified as an information operations planner in the Army, which is very rare for non-commissioned officers when you're not commissioned, because there used to be a program that doesn't exist anymore. So now only officers. I was one of the last to actually get that and have a a secondary MOS. So I had additional skill identifier, an ASI. So that was a 4P. So I was an information operations planner as well as an intelligence analyst, and I also became an instructor. I was EO qualified. I was a combatives instructor, which is the Army hand-to-hand combat, just for level 1, nothing too crazy. And in addition to that, I was cybersecurity certified, and I did cyber for the Army and as a contractor, and I worked in a reserve unit that focused on, I was a first IO command, and we planned, operations, on the cyber battlefield, which was incredibly difficult because the units didn't want you playing in those sandboxes anyway. They didn't want you coming up and messing up their network when they're trying to play war. But that's how the future was going to be. So I got a lot of experience in a short period of time, and I had my feet, I had 2 feet and 3 doors, I guess you could say. But it was one of the best things I could ever do. It made me highly marketable, and my education was covered, and the military, like, it has its ups and its downs, but it's what you make it. And I very much had certain experiences that were, Metal Gear Solid-esque. I worked at DIA, and the first time I'd heard about that was in a video game, and then I worked there. Like, it's incredible how some of these things do. And honestly, that mentality, I'm going to go ahead and be honest with how I got through basic training. My uncle Octavio, he gave me a piece of advice that worked phenomenally. He told me right before I left, he said, just remember, it's a game. The drill sergeants aren't there to, break you per se. They're there to train you. So all the things that they're doing may seem like that makes no sense or that it's cruel, but it's all to get you to a specific place. Like, if you all as a unit fail, or you don't graduate, or the numbers are low, it doesn't look good on them. So they want to get you to they want you to graduate. They're not going to, they're not going to fix the system. They're just going to do what they can to get you in the best shape, because that will also help save lives in the future when you eventually go off and fight in combat and whatnot. And so it's their job to get you ready. And, all the screaming and the yelling and the smoking, and like, when I say smoking, that's like when you get in trouble, they make you do like push-ups till your arms are wiggling until you fall down on your face, or, make you go outside and, do exercises until your lungs are bursting out of your chest. And all of it ends up becoming a thing where one person gets in trouble and everybody gets in trouble. So if one person does something wrong, everybody in the whole unit, gets punished for it, because it builds this sense of we all have to get better and we all have to take care of each other. And even if you do everything right, there's going to be moments where they're like, oh, hell no, you're still going to get in trouble as a unit, because it's just, it just builds this team. And at some point you start to get better, and you start to, work with these people, and you start to build a rapport, and you can do things without even talking to people, and you don't even realize that it's happening. And the advice that he gave me before leaving was, it's a game, pretend it's a game. And when that happened, I remember being in the field, and like I called back to that, and I was like turning on the game. Like I would literally close my eyes and open my eyes, and I was like, I'm playing Metal Gear Solid 2, and like just go through it. It's all right, I've got my I've got this, I've got my infinite ammo bandana, you know, whatever. Like I'm like looking at this like, all right, you know, what would Snake do? And I know that sounds crazy, but it's true, and it helped me process this game that we were playing. And you know, it becomes fun. You're like, it's almost like acting. Like I'm playing a role. Like I've got to do this. I've got to play the role instead of just being here's recruit. Like I'm like, oh, I'm on a mission, and it helped get through basic training. And then here I am, you know, going on to these other things, and you know, joining the military, you get 100% tuition for school. So like most people hear about the GI Bill, and that's great. There are so many things that you learn afterwards, like, or things that you learn from people, like, that are more than what you think they are. So the GI Bill, yes, that's fantastic. You can get paid to go to school after you're out, right? So you can get out of the military. You do most people don't know the obligation, at least it was then, was an 8-year obligation. So even if you only signed up for 4 years, you had 4 years in the reserves where they can call you back. So you can either actively go into reserves, or you know, you can go into what's called the IRR, the inactive ready reserve, and then they can call you back, and that could be potentially bad, because you could end up getting assigned to a unit that you know nothing about, and you don't, you know. So I would say if you join, be aware that you should go into the reserves. And I'm a fan of the reserves, because I wouldn't have done that initially. I'm glad I went active duty, and I would highly suggest anybody who joins, like, do at least some time active, because you know, the reserves has a different mindset, the National Guard has a different mindset, and a lot of the active folks, they have there's jealousy and there's animosity towards those other people, because they don't really understand how things work. But you also have to be aware that if you are active duty and you go into the reserves, it's not the same thing, and there are things that can be better, but you also have to be aware that the reserves is not the same as active duty, and you can't expect, you know, the way that things work on active duty to be the same. It doesn't apply. So I'll talk about that on another day, because that's a very, very good conversation to have. But anyway, the ultimately, you know, I did 4 years. I signed up for 4 years, and then I reenlisted for another 4 years. I went to Germany, and then I went to. I decided that I wanted to go somewhere that was nice and green and beautiful, because I knew I was going to go to Iraq or Afghanistan. And I said, if I do that, I want to go somewhere awesome. And a friend of mine was from Hawaii, and he decided, he got orders to Hawaii. So I said, I'm going to Hawaii. So I reenlisted for Hawaii. And a bunch of my friends, we all got together at the same time and decided to go to Hawaii. We all reenlisted for, you know, and some of them got, you know, good units. I ended up getting 25th Infantry Division. And one of my friends, I remember being in the reenlistment office, and when I reenlisted and signed my paperwork, he immediately pointed to the map and was like, he just put his hand on, what was it, North Carolina? And he was like, oh, so where are we going next? Like, implying that we were going to Fort Bragg, and we were going to go. He actually did end up going Fort Bragg and doing some really awesome stuff. And sometimes I regret not doing that. I got an offer, and I went and competed in some training that I thought I did really terrible at. It was a selection process, and I failed all of the tests. Like, I failed the physical, not the physical, but the PT test. You had to meet a certain score, and I passed the PT test, but I didn't pass to their standard. And then there was an obstacle course that I felt like I just did terrible at, and there was all these events that I just didn't make it. But yet they didn't tell me to go home, and so I just kept going through this thing. I think it was 2 weeks. And finally, at the end of it, there was these two other guys that were in my unit. They were both super fit, man. These guys, they had six-pack abs. They were super skinny. They could smoke a cigarette and run a freaking 2 mile in 13 minutes, or even faster. I think it was 12:56 or some shit. These guys were, I mean, they just were in it when it came to PT, but they were absolute assholes. They were just jerks, and they just were they wanted this, you know, to be Green Berets, and they thought they had it in the bag, and they were just passing everything, but they were complete jerks. And I was getting along with a lot of the folks that I was on the team with, and we were laughing, we were having a good time. And since they didn't kick me out, I didn't want to go back to my unit. I wanted to keep doing this training. I wanted to stay there for as long as I could, even though I knew I wasn't going, because I thought I passed or I failed this shit. So at the end of it, they end up telling me, they gave me an offer. And I was like, what is this? And these other guys, I had heard them leave the office and they were pissed. They were like, oh man, I didn't get selected. And I was like, what? How did these guys not get selected? They were bitching about it, how the whole thing was a scam. And then here I have this form that says that if I choose to, I can go do this. And I was like, how the hell did that happen? So one of the guys, I guess the instructor, came out and he told me, he was like, I don't give a shit about those guys. Like their attitude sucks. Like those guys were fucking piss poor. Like they out here running like, I don't give a shit that you're good at PT. Like, how are you going to solve these problems? He goes, you didn't fail at anything. We gave you these standards and you kept going. So like, it's much larger issue. He's like, PT, you can get there. This thing, it wasn't like you thinking that it's in this evaluation, it's something else. And I was like, holy shit, that's awesome. And then at the time I was in a relationship and the girl that I was with didn't want me doing dangerous stuff and told me not to do it. And I didn't. And I regret that. And it would have probably been tough because, you got to go airborne in order to be special forces. And I don't like jumping out of planes. I've rappelled off of, helicopters. I didn't go through, the training. I would have loved to have gone through, 101st Airborne and gone air assault. Like, freaking love that. It's so cool. And we had done some things like that in training and simulations. And I had also done, rappelling from buildings. And I loved that. I thought it was awesome. And I'm a person that doesn't really like heights. So that's an impressive feat. But I don't want to jump out of a plane. I don't have a problem jumping out of a rope on the side of a building, even if the building's 5 stories, which I did. I did 3. I think I did three stories, but I didn't have a problem with that. 1, because I wasn't looking down, and 2, for some reason, holding on to something feels different. Like, as long as I can hold on to something, I know you can think, oh, you hold on to your parachute, but I don't know why. Like, I just feel like the idea of a rope is different than a parachute that might have holes in it, because that's allowed. You're allowed to have, like, I don't know how many holes. But anyway, I went off on kind of a tangent. But ultimately the GI Bill you use after you get out, right? So you can go into the reserves and use it. But why would you do that? Because while you're in the Army, active or reserves, and I think the same applies to National Guard, you get 100% tuition assistance. So your GI Bill is unnecessary unless you need it for, like, if you wanted to go to school and then receive, they pay out an allowance for housing. So if you go to school full time, you get an allowance for housing that, depending on where you live, is good money. So, like, for example, in Miami, I think it was like $2,300 a month, and because I think it's E5 with dependent pay for whatever the year is, and you get that every month. Plus, you get like a school stipend for books or whatever. But the important thing is that all of this is, you don't have to use that. You have 100% tuition assistance. So while you're going to work, you can take classes at night. And it doesn't have to be full time. You can take one class at a time here and there, and you get your degree. So the thing about the GI Bill is that your GI Bill is probably not going to really work for like higher education in terms of like a master's degree. Like that's pretty much going to cover your associates and your bachelor's and maybe some other things. But you stand to benefit saving that if you can get a master's degree, or even if you wanted to, you get a PhD with your tuition assistance, and you can go to Army College, Army War College, or whatever for officers, and you can get Green to Gold program, decide to go an officer, and have the Army also pay for your school, or even go ROTC, and you go to college, and then you just do drills like you were in a unit, and then they pay for your school, and then you also become an officer. So there were all these options that I really didn't know about, and I wish more people had talked to me about, that I knew of before going in. So that way I could have had these education things benefited and pay for, rather than just thinking, oh, okay, I got my GI Bill. But I did do school while I was in. I used my tuition assistance. But if you don't use your GI Bill, if you're, say you start a family, you can pass that on. You can give, time to your wife, to your kids. You can divide it up, or you can, say you only have one child, you can pay for your child. So yeah, so your kids' school can be paid for, or your significant other. So when I was married, I gave, when I say was, I've been married twice. So in my first marriage, I gave my my ex-wife some time for school so that she can take care of some things. And she didn't use it, which, is, she didn't need it. She ended up going to school on her own separately with other things, and good for her. I guess, I don't know if she felt she couldn't use it, but when we split up, it was kind of, something that I said, I want you to do good for yourself. Like it was mutual. Like that relationship was done. It had its time, and I decided that, on the way out, like, you're going to need this. You don't have school, and you should take a couple of months. I think I gave her 6 months of school for free, and she didn't end up using it. But, I wanted to make sure that she was all right. Like, and I felt bad for her, and I didn't have to. She did well. She did good for herself, and she's got a great relationship now. She has her own child. Her son's awesome. He's hung out with my sons, and great kid. And she has a relationship with my wife because they bonded over certain things. They both experienced some miscarriages, and they had some shared experiences, and they also had to deal with me. So so they had some shared trauma dealing with me, right? And that being said, my wife now, I wanted her to go to school, and she was going to school when we first met, so I gave her some of my GI Bill, and she's used some of that, and then I divided up the rest for my kids, so they have at least some time. I have 3 boys, so they have some time to go to school when they get older, and I've used the benefits the military has given me, to large extent. I've taken full advantage of those things, and there's plenty of programs and so much more out there to be utilized. So I highly encourage anybody, if you have any questions, to reach out to me. I've learned a lot recently. I just met a guy the other day who told me if you're 100% disabled, that the government will, pay for your, not only for your school, but for your children's school if you're 100% totally permanently disabled. And also, if reimburse for student loans. Like he said, he got $80,000. I think he's 4 years, and so he had an $80,000 loan that was repaid. So, those benefits are out there, but you have to know to use them, and the money's there, so somebody's going to use it. So, you be mindful, learn these things, and ask people questions, man. Talk to older folks. Like I was always asking people who outrank me, older people who had been in for longer, just asking questions, man. Always be curious. And ultimately, joining the military was for several different things. I wanted to have a family, and this seemed like a viable option to take care of these things. It worked for me. It's not for everyone. And if you do decide that you want to join the military, or someone that wants to do it, be smart about it. Like, look at the jobs. Like, don't just fall into a trap of talking to a recruiter, and don't be suckered in by recruiters who show up. My recruiter showed up in high school with a different, he'd rent the most badass car and show up at school and flaunt like he had money. He was renting those cars. He didn't have that. And the Army doesn't, some people think you join the military and the Army pays you and you make so much money. No. You don't get paid all that much, and you get paid by your rank. Some people think, oh, this job is more expensive. Certain jobs will get you more pay outside. But for the most part, your skills will translate to a lot of different things. And your service will also translate to military credits to college credits for things. Like, you won't have to worry about physical fitness classes because you've been in the military, so that'll automatically go towards that. So you have all these extracurriculars that will be taken care of. And then in addition to that, you have leadership skills. You have writing skills, computer knowledge. You have all these things that will translate to extracurriculars and to all these other to courses that you won't need to take, and to credit hours. And some of that's evaluated differently. In the Army, we had ACE, so you go and you take your transcript from all your training, and then you send that to your school, and then they tell you, okay, this is how many credits you have in X, Y, and Z. And each school is different. And so there's so many opportunities out there for people, and I highly encourage somebody to look through it. And my son has talked about, when I was, he's young, my oldest, he's 12, and he had mentioned, when I get older, I want to join the military. And I was like, look, I'm not going to discourage you from doing that, because there are people who are like, oh, that's not, I don't want my kid doing that. I want you to do whatever you want to do with your life. And I want you to, have your own choices. And I'd like to give you informed information on those choices. If you do it the right way. I don't just join the Army because you thought that it looks cool, or because I did it and you want to follow in my footsteps. Do what makes you happy. Do what's going to make you feel, something that's going to help fulfill you in life. And so I told him, well, what about, the Space Force? Space, we're not going to war with the aliens anytime soon. So that's one thing. It's safe, in a sense. And, or maybe not, I don't know, 2023, who knows? But the technology that we're developing, we're going to be moving towards maybe colonizing, in space, either setting up a space station or a space colony, or, something on the moon, maybe a lunar base, or going to Mars and terraforming planets. Eventually we have to leave this planet, expand, because, that's just just the way I see it has to happen. And so that is being on the cusp of tomorrow. Don't worry about what's, here today. Like, what's the new industry of tomorrow? What's going to benefit you going forward? What's going to make you more marketable? So think in those terms. So I said, hey, that's something to consider in a few years. You go to school and you get become a space ranger, be Buzz Lightyear, and travel through space and time, and get skills for that. Learn to code, learn different things. So like, it's a matter of making your value and taking these things and saying, what can I do? And not just reacting like I did. Unfortunately, I reacted. However, I made good with it. And even though I didn't, I never went to Second City and I never did improv, I was in movies. I was in TV shows. I was in a film called Rampage. It was my first movie starring Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson. I was called, my wife signed me up for a casting call for service members, for military guys. And they called me up. After sending some pictures, they thought it was cool. I went and I did a fitting, and they put me in an Air Force uniform. And I was like, oh man, what is this? I did not, being an Army guy, that's a big deal. I did not want to wear an Air Force uniform. So I said, no, I don't know that I can do this. And, ultimately I was finding excuses as to why I didn't want to do it. So they called me up. They told me I was going out there, that I was going to get paid to go and do this role in Atlanta. And I'm thinking, why am I going to leave my job? I work in D.C. I'm making great money. What I'm going to get paid for those 3 days is not what I make even in one day here. Like that seems like not a good idea. Mind you, I'm making excuses, right? And I didn't realize why. So my wife calls me out and she says, "You're scared." I said, "Scared? I'm not scared. Since when am I scared of stuff? I'm bold. I try to do crazy things. Like I try to do them. I just end up doing crazy things. But I was like, that's not it at all. And she goes, yeah, but it's not, you're not scared to do it. You're scared you're going to like it. And I was like, oh, shit. I think she's onto something. Like it was something I didn't even recognize in myself. Like I was worried that maybe I would get that bug and I wouldn't want to be able to look back, that I wouldn't be able to be satisfied with doing the work that I was doing and working some desk job, over in one of these companies because I wanted more. And for the most part, she was right. She had me pegged. And so she said, "Do not talk to me until you land in Atlanta. Get out." She called an Uber. She told me to get out the house. She threw my bag with my clothes in my arms and told me to get out the house. It was the hottest thing ever. I was like, wow, this chick, man. It was awesome. That was great. And she didn't. I texted her. She didn't answer. I called. She didn't answer. When I got to Atlanta, I told her I'm here. And she was like, good. And I was like, oh, man. So I get on set, and I had actually considered, I brought my Reserve Army uniform, and I thought about wearing that. I was like, I cannot put on this thing. This is terrible. I can't. That's not how all this works. Like you're supposed to do what you will. But I thought, oh, nobody will notice. Like I didn't know anything about how these sets worked or anything. And this guy, like, I mentioned that to some dude that I had my Army uniform in my back pocket. He was in Army. There was only like 3 of us. He was also in the Army. He was a reservist or National Guard, I remember. But there was only like 3 of us on set that were actually service members. Nobody else was. And so that's jarring. You see a bunch of people walking around in uniforms that aren't in the military, and you're like, what is this? Like I see them hands in their pockets, or like, because these are things that you can't do in the military. You can't have your hands in your pocket. If you're outside in uniform, you better have a hat on when you're, or the cover. You better cover your head, with your cap or whatever. And nobody's doing this, walking and talking on a cell phone. These are things you can't be doing, right? And I realize this is fake. Like these aren't soldiers, or these aren't service members. And it was just like really shocking because it looks like that, and it looked just like buildings that I worked in. Like this, the set looked exactly like the operations center that I worked in at my regular job. It was exactly the same thing, except for the fact that the large screens in front weren't real. It was a green screen. But other than that, it looked exactly the same. And when they put stuff on the screen, you couldn't tell. It was just like, oh my God, this is so weird that I'm pretending to do a job that I actually do, both in my civilian life and as when I say that, as a contractor, and also as a service member. Like it's just mind blowing. And I tell this guy this thing. I was like, oh, I want to put this uniform on. He goes, no. He says, Air Force and Navy guys are always the guys on the computers. He said, that's just the way it is in Hollywood. So he goes, they picked you because they probably want to put you over here. And they ended up giving me a desk. And I was like, huh. He goes, yeah, Army guys and Marines, we guard the doors. I was like, oh, man, that's so interesting. So the next time you look at a movie, look who's guarding the doors and look who's working on the computers. You're probably not going to see an Army guy on the computers unless it's specifically an Army movie. It's just really weird. Those are like the stereotypes in Hollywood. So I'm sitting there in an Air Force uniform pretending to be, this thing that I actually do in real life. And, that kind of made some things easy. First, I had to take myself out of it and realize on screen how something looks. How you would do a job in real life is not going to be cinematically appropriate, which is why, when you see hackers in movies, they're typing on the keyboard because really, if you're sitting there using a mouse, it doesn't look as cool as typing and looking like everything's hectic. So you got to, that's just the way it is. So the same thing goes with movie scenes. You're like, oh, I'm watching this in the military. You're like, why did they do that? That's not how this tactical movement will be done, or that's not how you fire that weapon, or that's not. Sometimes it's just how it looks. It doesn't look cool. That's not. In reality, you're not going to fight in those ways, but you see guys in movies where they hold the machine gun down at their waist and they're spraying. That just looks, I guess, cool on film in a way. And so that's just Hollywood's perception of things. How does it look cinematically? It doesn't. In reality, some of the tactical stuff, it's effective, but it just doesn't look as good on screen. And so it was amazing. I ended up meeting the military advisor, which is a guy who was a special ops dude, and he wrote a book. God, what was it called? The book was about the guys who they had the bloodiest battle in military history since Vietnam, and his name was Patrick Brown, and he was a military advisor on Godzilla, King of the Monsters, on Rampage, Avengers Endgame. He did a lot of really cool stuff, and I noticed a tattoo that he had that was from a unit I recognized. This guy's just pretty cool, and it turns out we had been in some of the same places, and he ended up taking me backstage and introducing me to people, and I had conversations with The Rock because he's the military advisor. So I wasn't just an extra, I was also hanging out with the military advisor and working back scenes. This is not something that normally happens. I was very fortunate, and a lot of it had to do with the fact that I was bold in the sense of just talking to someone, and that's what a lot of these things have to do. It's just you have a I'm just going to go ahead and laugh at that. So my son, he wanted some attention. So my baby boy's in the back, and you can hear him. I'm leaving that in. That's hilarious. And so he's like, Baba! He gets dragged off. But anyway, that's being that he broke in there, and that's a good segue, I did this for my family. I wanted to help my parents. They were struggling at the time and living in Miami, and my sister was having a hard time, and I wanted to be able to send money home, and I wanted to help provide for my parents. And then when I had my own family, I wanted to help provide for them. And TRICARE is one of the best insurance in the country. And I think a lot of things would be a lot better off in this country if we just had better health care. That solves a lot of problems, and people don't realize it. But that's another topic of discussion for somewhere else. I'm going to write that down. But ultimately, that's my story for joining the military, and it went kind of off on a tangent because I ended up, towards the end of my career, pretending to be a soldier. But the most significant thing that I ever did in my actual service was I was the last 6 months of my service. I was in the funeral NCOIC, so funeral non-commissioned officer in charge. I was in charge of the performing military funerals. At the time, my unit was deployed in Afghanistan, and we had some losses, and some of my friends passed away, including Sergeant Gross. It's really hard for me to talk about some of these guys, so I'm not going to mention their names now because it gets to me. But the one that really hit me hard at the time was Staff Sergeant Kelly, Sergeant Nigel Kelly. He was in Germany with me. We didn't know each other too well. I knew that he was in the other unit, and we had crossed paths a few times. We deployed to Iraq together, and we were in Hawaii together, 25th Infantry. He was an engineer, and I was in the S2 shop, which is the planning, the intel planning shop, and processing clearances and whatnot at our battalion. And he died in Afghanistan. He was shot in the leg, and he bled out. What happened was they were receiving fire, and the helicopter that came to to medevac him was hit with fire, and they had to do an on-site repair. And they did, and they got the bird up and running, and they got him on there. But in the time that it took to do the repair, I think it was like maybe a 4-minute issue. In those 4 minutes, that caused him to bleed out too much, and he wasn't able to be saved. So a guy who was the same age as me, same rank as me, just got married like I had, had been to the same duty stations. We had very similar career trajectories, and he got shot in the leg, and he died just like that. And that affected me profoundly. So I was assigned to escort his body from Dover. I went to Dover. He came from Afghanistan. They shipped him in, and the facility in Dover is where they handle. It's basically the Army's where they take care. So the funeral services for I don't know if I think it's all branches. And so I was supposed to escort him to his final resting place in Arlington, and I was assigned to the family to essentially take care of the funeral services and all these things. It turns out that his wife and I had met before, and we didn't know this. She was also in the military. She was also in our unit, and she was a medic. When I was in Iraq, I busted my knee. We were getting fired at. The base was receiving indirect fire, and I don't know if it was mortars or 107 Mike rounds were coming over, or 110, and then the rockets were coming across. It was nighttime, and I was running, and my platoon sergeant ended up running into these low wires. They were like, I guess, I don't know if they were like telephone wires or like internet wires that were running from one building to another, because the power came from one area but the computers were in another. Anyway, he ended up choking. Like, he ran into this and it clotheslined him, and I saw it happen, and I ducked underneath it, looked back at him, and I was kind of laughing like, oh damn, he got clotheslined. And when that happened, I wasn't looking forward, and I ran into a barrier, and I crushed my knee on a concrete barrier and flipped over it and landed on my back. And then he came over me and was like, haha, that's what you get for laughing at me. I was like, god damn it. So I ended up going over to the medic, because my knee was busted up, and they were laughing at me when I told them the story. To find out later that this was the same medic, because she was telling a story while we were out having dinner with the family and everything. This was, I guess, maybe after the first day of the viewing and whatnot, and we were having dinner and people were having some drinks, and she's telling a story about this idiot who busted his leg on a concrete barrier and flipped over it, and what a moron. And I was like, I know that idiot. And she was like, what? I was like, yeah, I'm that idiot. And she was like, oh my god. And we ended up like laughing about it, and we ended up becoming really close. Me and everybody there. I knew these guys in my unit, but I didn't really know them. And now all these dudes who are here for the funeral, and these guys who knew Kelly, and it was just this profound moment where we bonded, and I got to know these guys. And I didn't really feel like I was a part of my unit when we were in Iraq, because I was on a different shift. I was on night shift, and like the people, I didn't know those guys. We deployed, and I had just gotten to the unit, and everybody else had deployed together, and they had bonds, and I didn't have that. I was lonely, and I didn't really make a lot of good. I made some friends in the ops section and stuff, but it wasn't the same. The people that I was close with were on different shifts, and it was different. I was just treated differently, and I didn't have the experience that they did. And here I am bonding with these guys, and they're awesome, and we're still friends to this day. And all of a sudden, we're there at, I think it was, I don't know if it was the last day of the viewing or we're not, but it was the funeral, and I'm supposed to stand guard by the coffin, and they, she comes over to me and she's like, you're not doing that. Like, we all served. There's no way I'm letting you just stand there at the position of attention next to the, like, go sit down with the family. So she was awesome. So I go down, and it's whatever they call. So like, whatever they decide to do is whatever they decide to do. So, she basically said, you're relieved from that. Like, go and, sit down with us and be a part of the services. And I went and I stayed over in the corner. I think I was having a glass of iced tea or something. I don't remember. And his brother comes in. He has his twin brother, and he walks in, and I was like, oh my God. It was like so strange. I didn't know he had a twin brother. And it was like, wow, that's so crazy. It's like seeing him all over again. And his grandfather walks over to us, and he's talking to me, and I remember Strack was next to me. It was David, and he was a good guy. And I don't remember who the other guy was that was next to me. And we're standing there, and he walks over, and he says, did you know my grandson? I said, yeah. And he shakes our hands, and he says, I told my grandson not too long ago that I wanted him to write his story, write down all these events that are happening to you and write down your story. And he said, Grandpa, nobody wants to hear that. He said, I didn't get to tell him at the time, but I wanted to read that story. I wanted to read my grandson's story. And so he looked at us right, I felt like he was looking right into my soul. He looked me right in the eye and he said, write down your story because somebody wants to read it. And I made him a promise. I grabbed his hand and I shook it and I said, sir, I want you to know that when I write my story, that I will write everything that I can about your grandson's story. And I will keep that. And as I've been writing my book, that's a significant portion of it. So I wanted to kind of just plug that, and I need the motivation to continue it, because it's hard to write those things sometimes. It's hard to talk about these things that are somewhat traumatic, but it's important. I made him a promise, and ultimately that's a significant portion of my life. In addition to doing that, once I did that, I had to perform funeral details. I had to actually conduct the funerals and call the commands for the 21-gun salute and train the guys to practice on how to fire the weapons and how to what movements to make and what commands to call, and folding the flag and delivering the flag. And my job as the funeral NCOIC was to take the folded triangle. Once the flag is folded, it's removed off of the coffin and then folded into this triangle shape. That's supposed to. The reason for that is it's supposed to look like the old colonial hats, like during the Revolution. So like what the I guess uniform for the soldiers was at the time. It looks like those hats. Like, I guess that's the thing. And you fold this triangle and then you'd give it to the next of kin. And I had lots of different experiences. We had guys who just were retirees, guys who were just older and passed. You had when I say guys, I mean like there were men and women. And but when a service member passed, like, it wasn't always just from combat. Sometimes people were just old. One of the great experiences that I have, because I definitely don't want to end this on a downer, but the most significant experience I had, I'll say that one first because it's a downer, and then I'll get to the happy one. But the most significant one was and painful was a young girl whose father passed away. He was a first sergeant, I think, and I don't remember if it was I think it was in Afghanistan. He was a first sergeant, or at least an E7. Or maybe an E8. I mean, mind you, it was higher up, and she was 12 years old. And this 12-year-old girl had lost her father, and we were instructed that the next of kin, that we were giving the flag to his wife. And so I was practicing what I was going to say to his wife, and practicing you have to memorize a thing, and then hand it to her, and the funeral would end. So everything goes off, then 21-gun salute. They play the trumpet, and you get the taps and the whole thing, and right before the funeral starts, instead of I get told plans changed, you're not giving it to his wife, you're going to give it to his daughter. And I'm like, what? Which one's his daughter? And then they point to this 12-year-old girl, and I was devastated. I did not know how to do this. I mean, I have to do it, but I was like, it's painful, and especially if I didn't have time to process it. So what's great about this scenario was that my soldiers were trained so well. Like, we were so good at this that when it came to me having to call the command for them to march off the field, when I was handing this girl the flag, I handed it to her. I said what I needed to say, and this girl started crying, and I got a knot in my throat, and I couldn't call the last command for them to turn and march off. And they saw it, and they were able to just execute it without the command. And I was able to walk off and not let the family see that I started shedding some major tears as I was marching off. But we were so in tune that they saw it in my face that I wasn't going to be able to call that command without breaking and start crying, and they knew that could not happen in front of her. And one of the other guys took the lead on that and silently called to the team and called the command, and they marched off, and it was amazing. And that was such a profound experience. Like, handing that off to that girl was one of the most difficult things I've ever done. But I thought it was important that we had to do those things. And The great thing about all those things is you realize how much this is his family's last memory, you know, of this person. Like, I mean, there's other memories, but like you want to honor them in this way. And there was another event where we went to, we were watching, we were trying to, when we were still actually training, we had watched a few other details perform their services. So we watched some Navy guys perform a funeral, and it was on the top of this hill in a cemetery in downtown Honolulu. And it was like very windy. It was like on top of a mountain. It was beautiful, and you could see all of, you know, Honolulu. And make sure I correctly pronounce that, Honolulu. And it's Hawaii. Like when you've lived there long enough, you know, and then like Hawaiians know. So anyway, you can oversee the city, and like and you see the beach, and it's beautiful, right? And these guys do their thing, and they decided to, you know, pop the flag out and hold it up before they would fold it. It was just kind of a cool motion to do that we had kind of adopted. We learned from them to do that. We're like, oh wow, that looks really dope when you just kind of like, and when you're getting ready to fold it, you just pop it out and then you do it. Well, these guys executed that, and it was on a super windy day, and the flag flew off into the sky towards the ocean. And we were like, oh my God, what just happened? The guy who was running, this is a Navy guy, he immediately turns and salutes the flag as if that was supposed to happen. And I could hear all the people in the funeral services going, oh my God, that's amazing. I can't believe they did that. Like they thought it was part of the thing. It wasn't at all. Like they legit thought, oh my God, that's so cool. Like they did that. Like that had nothing to do with it. So, you know, there are going to be times where things get messed up in these funerals, and like that's not what's important. What's important is the demeanor and how you react to things and how you were able to handle something that maybe shouldn't have gone down that way, because this is the last memory that they'll have. And in one sense, they might not know the traditions or how things go, and that works to your benefit. And in the other sense, if you have to improvise, if you make it look good, they will have a significant memory from this, and they'll know that their loved one was respected and that this was done with dignity and honor. And I'm gonna, you know, that's you know, a pretty funny story. But I'm gonna go ahead and close out with a. We were called to go to Kauai, to Kauai, and there was an older guy. He was a World War II veteran who had died, and they didn't want. We were flying out there to conduct the funeral, but they didn't want a 21-gun salute. They said they had their own guys, and we were like, oh, okay. So we get out there and we find out that the guys they had were a bunch of these old dudes that were deployed with this guy. So friends of his that he had served with. These guys are in their 90s, man, all 90s. These small Asian guys come out and they've got their rifles and they're holding it together, and they did this 21-gun salute for their friend, and it was beautiful, man. It was absolutely beautiful. It was awesome. And these guys crushed it. And I was just so proud of that. Like, look at these guys. These guys were, all these years later, these guys went to war in World War II with each other. And all these years later, these guys still have a relationship. They're still meeting up at this little museum that they created. It was basically like, I don't know if it's the VFW, but it was like their, I guess it was like their little VFW, like a little Veterans of Foreign Wars, like this little group that they met up every week. And they donated all of their, I guess, things that they had acquired during their service to this museum that they had built on site. And essentially it was a World War II museum. They had flags and pictures and all these weapons and all these different things that were there, and they donated it, and people would come and look at the museum, and then they would it was for donations. So you come in to donate, like there was no price. You can come for free, but people donate. And so they asked us to stay after the funeral. They were like, hey, can you guys want to come back with us and check out the museum? We were like, absolutely. We were supposed to fly back immediately, and we're like, screw that. We're going to hang out with these dudes. So we go to this place, and the guy says, we're going to have some lunch. I'm like, all right, cool. He says, you like sushi, you like poke? And I was like, yeah, I love poke, like absolutely. He goes, cool. So he opens the fridge, and I'm thinking he's gonna pull out a thing of there's gonna be some fresh cut, or maybe they got it from the store, and the fridge is just full of beer, nothing but beer. And I'm like, what's that? And he's like, oh yeah, that's not the fish. This is what we're really here for. But he goes, a buddy's gonna go get the fish now. So I thought he was gonna go to a store. Not true at all. He ends up going behind the building, and there's like a I guess like right across the street, there's the ocean or a river or something. and he actually fished some fish out, like right there, tuna, and killed the tuna right there, cut it up, and made the freshest, like, poke I've ever had in my life, which is just, raw, raw tuna, or, like different kinds of fish. But it was like, oh my God, it was amazing. And then we're just slamming beers, which, by the way, you should eat before you drink, and we were already drinking, and fish doesn't really exactly do it. Like, it's not going to coat your stomach enough for you to not get tanked. So we got tanked. So then these guys take us over to, and by the way, they outdrank us incredibly. I was like, oh my God, these guys are out of control. Like, they are awesome, man. They were drinking us under the table, and we're, I was at 24, 25. Anyway, no, I think it was 26. And these guys are in their 90s, man. It was amazing. So they take us over to the museum, and we're walking around, and I see this picture of one of the guys with General Shinseki, but it wasn't a general. He says, that's Lieutenant Shinseki, and I was like as in General Shinseki, the head of the VA. He says, yeah. I was like, what? He tells me, yeah, he was our platoon leader. And I was like, wow, that is crazy, man. And they started telling all these stories about Lieutenant Shinseki. And if you know anything about Shinseki, look him up. Like, you can imagine that there were some interesting stories. Anyway, Shinseki is also the guy who instituted the beret. So the black beret came about because originally black berets were for, if I'm not mistaken, for Rangers. Green berets are for special forces, and the tan berets were for airborne, and the black beret was for Rangers. And everybody got a black beret, and they ended up giving a tan beret to the Rangers, if I'm not mistaken. And a lot of people hated it. People hated the beret, and it also dumbed down what the beret is. Like, the green beret, the maroon beret, and the tan beret, those are, important. You earned them through these qualifications. You earned them through, whether being in a unit assigned to that unit, or, by having this skill identifier. Like, you earned that. So giving everybody a beret was just like, no, that didn't help. That didn't make everybody look awesome. You come to find out later that Shinseki's wife owned the company that made the berets. Go figure, right? So anyway, like, no wonder he instituted that. They got paid. But anyway, so these guys then show me another picture of, there was a small picture, and then it was blown up, and they had this giant mural of a guy playing ukulele with Elvis Presley. There's Elvis Presley with a ukulele in his hand, and the guy's next to him, and I was like, whoa, that is awesome. And he goes, do you know who that guy is? And I said, well, that's Elvis. He goes, no, the other guy. I said, no. He goes, that's the guy we did the funeral for. So the guy we had just done the funeral had, I said, oh my God, it's amazing. He played ukulele with Elvis Presley. The guy goes, no, man. He goes, the story's way cooler than that. He goes, he taught Elvis how to play ukulele. My mind was blown. I was like, wow, dude, this guy was awesome. And we just conducted a funeral. We just, paid respect to this guy, and he was amazing. And if you ever get a chance to go out to Kauai, in Hawaii, and find this place, I need to find the details on it, but like this, this World War II, and the island's not big. It's like one, I want to say there's one 2-lane road that goes around the whole island. So if you know, just, go to this World War II, this veterans museum, and talk to those guys, man. They're amazing. And I last heard, I don't know how many of them are still alive now, but when I last heard, they were meeting up there like every weekend. And mind you, this was in 2011, so I don't know if those guys are still around, which is, when I think about it, pretty sad now. But those guys were amazing, man. I had an amazing time, and we ended up flying back, like, I don't know, in the middle of the night or whatever, and we were absolutely obliterated. Those guys, like, sick to our stomachs. Like, those guys drank us under the table. It was absolute insanity. And then we flew back to Hawaii, and I was like, oh my God, we got to go to work the next day. It was, oh man, I remember being hungover. That was crazy. But those are the kinds of stories that you get when you join the service. These are just, I mean, I have so many stories, but these are the kind of things that happen when you dedicate your life to something like that. When you meet these people that I know that I can call up, some of the people that I've met in my life and that I've met in the service. And right now, I hadn't seen them in 2 years, and right now, if we sit together, it's like we never lost touch. There are certain bonds that are inexplicable. Like you have bonds with, you have a best friend, or you have a sibling, or, with your parents. Like each one of these bonds is different. Like I say, like love is categorized differently. Like you love your mom in a completely different way than you love your significant other, like your spouse or your girlfriend, boyfriend, whatever. They're both love, but they're completely different way. One is romantic, one is, familial, and there's variations of that. Like you love your best friend differently than you would, a cousin or, other people. It's just different. There's so much nuance, and you love a brother or sister differently than you would one of your children. Like there's so many differences and nuances to this that I look at it the same way, in that with friends and all these variations, there is a bond that is between people who have served, and especially people who have deployed together or even been in similar situations, where you develop a bond that is on a completely different level. It's not necessarily more or less, when it comes to like in a romantic sense. It just is a different thing. So you have that bond that exists in almost indescribable. You have this camaraderie that people like to use that word a lot, but it's hard to effectively describe it. You have a rapport, and you have this connection with people that transcends all these other things, and it transcends race, it transcends biases, it transcends all these other things that we block and we put up to divide ourselves, and these experiences transcend that. Like you look at this person, and there's no labels in that. Like you are inexplicably bonded. You are brethren. You are, that is your brother, your sister, it's just something incredible, and it's hard to effectively describe. It's just something you feel. It's not something you can really put words to. I'm having a hard time describing it now, but it's just something that you feel. It's just something that's there. And I think that's kind of how love is. Like when you're like actually in love, if you've been in love before and you find, what you consider to be true love, it's hard to describe, what the difference is. You're like, I knew that I loved this person, but I wasn't in love, and this is love. Like I know that the bond that I have with my wife, if I can tell that, like, wow, when we reconnected, because we knew each other in high school and she didn't know I existed, but when we reconnected and fell in love, like I was like, wow, this is what that feels like. And it's incredible. And it's still like, we've been together for I guess 7 or 8 years, and it doesn't feel like that at all. And that's a great thing. Like she's still the first person I want to talk to about everything, and she knows things about me that I don't have to say. Like we're in tune with each other on things, and we discuss things with each other, and it's a bond. And I feel like there's a similar bond when you've deployed with someone or you've served with someone, where it's like other people really can't understand it. It's just a thing, and it might not make sense from the outside, but it just kind of does make sense to you. It's a conundrum, I would say. And it's just interesting, paradoxical concepts, but it's just the way it is. And so if anybody's thinking about serving in the military, I highly recommend it. My experiences in service were amazing, and it helped me develop into the person that I am, and it helped me. I think that when I was on set in Rampage and I was talking to these folks, I was bold because I was, I had the confidence that was built in me through the military, overcoming these obstacles that I didn't think I could overcome. I wasn't a strong runner, and here I am running 2 miles in under 15 minutes. And, here I am doing pull-ups, and here, rappelling off of buildings and just doing things that I thought physically I probably, I wouldn't have been able to do, and suddenly I'm doing them. Suddenly you're not thinking about it, you're just doing it. And I spent a year in Iraq, and I survived. I've been blown up, been shot at, been, like all these traumatic experiences, and yet I'm still going. And every single one of them was brought upon through the building of this confidence and the nature of these things, just experiences and becoming, learning about yourself and being confident in who you are, and sometimes just not even thinking about doing something, just doing it and reacting to it afterwards. You just got to get the job done. It's not about running. Running sucks. I don't want to think about running, but I'm going to run those 2 miles, and then I'll deal with the consequences of the 2 miles after I puke at the end of after I've crossed the finish line. And I actually passed basic training with a what do you call it? With bronchitis. I went to I was actually given an opportunity. I went to the hospital, and they were going to put me on quarters, which meant like I had to be locked in the hospital, and I was going to miss my PT test, which meant I was going to fail, and then I was going to be stuck there. And my drill sergeant showed up in a van, and he wasn't going to sign me out, but like the timing was incredible. He basically came over and said, the van's outside. If you stay here, you're going to get recycled, and you're going to have to do all of this all over again. He goes, I don't care what you got in your lungs. If you run that PT test tomorrow and you pass it, you're graduating and you're getting out of here. So run like you're running home. Just imagine running home. And he said, the van's outside. I can't sign you out of here. You can't sign out of here. They got you. But if you get in that van, they're not going to track you for a little bit, and you're good. You can graduate, and by the time they realize you're missing, which is crazy when you think about it, you'll already be processed out of here. And that's what happened. That next day, I walked out that clinic. Nobody said anything. I just walked out the clinic, hopped in the van. He drove me back to the barracks, and that next morning, I went and did that PT test, and I passed it with like a couple seconds to spare. I ran, and all I could imagine in my head was running in my neighborhood towards my house, just running home towards my house. And I ran, and I got to that finish line, and right when I got there, I like collapsed, dropped down on my knees, and got ready to start puking. And then the drill sergeant yells at me, "You didn't cross the line, Cruz!" And I realized I actually didn't have to cross, so I stuck my arm and like rolled over and actually crossed the line, and I made it by like 2 seconds or some shit. And then I started puking everywhere. You know you really ran hard when you start puking. But I almost failed it because I was like so relieved, like, hey. Meanwhile, I was like 2 inches from the damn line. I didn't actually cross it. And he was like, "Cross the damn line, Cruz!" I was like, oh shit. And so anyway, sometimes it's by an inch or by a mile. And that's all it takes. You survived. You made it. You passed it. And these are events in your life. And I highly recommend the service for anybody. And there's ways to go about it. There's different ways, and talk to people. And there's different opportunities for things. And if you do it the smart way, and you have a plan, and you know what you're going to do when you're in, and you know what you're going to do when you get out, or at least have an idea, and set goals and write them down, and talk to people who know things, and don't just go blindly, and don't just follow. That's one of the things that I think the military definitely brought out in me too, was not being a follower and being a leader. And I think I'd always had those qualities, leadership qualities, but when you're not confident, you don't think that anyone's going to listen to you. Or, I was an E1, and I was in basic training calling shots and motivating other people, and I was given the Outstanding Performance Award in basic training for being like the most improved. Like I most improved in PT, I most improved in all these qualities, and I motivated a lot of people because I needed that myself. I was talking to them, but I was really just telling myself, you get off your ass, you got to do this. And so like the more I motivated them, the more they motivated me, and the more I motivated myself, and we were able to accomplish things. So all these leadership qualities were coming out of a need, a need for personal need that translated to these other folks. And I would, crack jokes in basic training. I got to definitely tell stories about that in a different time because there's so many. But I would do voices of the drill sergeants and voices, like do different. I can do some mimic voices and stuff. So I'd hear voices and do some jokes at night, and we'd get smoked for it. And I definitely got in trouble. I definitely have to tell this story later on. I got in trouble for something involving changing my voice, but ultimately, like, people saw me as a motivator. People were inspired by some of the things that I had done, and that was a drastic difference from the person who started. The kid who was unsure of himself and just didn't know what to do in life, and was hoping that I could get an opportunity. And here I was taking charge, and it allowed me to be confident. So if you're considering joining the service, or someone who's joining the service, tell them, talk to people, encourage them, and just be smart about it. Like I recommend it, and I think that it's more than just being patriotic. It's having opportunities that you may not have been accustomed to, and it does things for you. It does. It opens up things, and it allows you to meet people and see the world. And there's so much opportunity. And so just if you know someone who's thinking about it, be smart about it and talk to people, not just recruiters, because they're just going to tell you what you want to hear, or what they're just going to tell you a bunch of crap to get you to sign paperwork. Their job isn't to keep you in. Their job's just to get you across the line. So don't listen, like, you know, be knowledgeable, do your homework, talk to people, and yeah, and have some fun. Like if you're already in and you're scared, have some fun. I think that's important. And there are things that I will take with me forever. And clearly I'm having a hard time figuring out where to end this. But no, but I'm serious. Like there's so much I could say about service. There's so much I can talk about, and I realize that I definitely want to. So I will definitely be talking about this more in the coming weeks on my YouTube channel, Story Avenue. It's actually under my name, so just Paul Cruz. But like the reason I put Story Avenue in there and like the kind of theme going forward to Story Avenue, because that's the title of my book, and it's a, I guess you could say, a comedic, nonfiction narrative form memoir, but there's a lot in there. Like it's not just about service. It's about it's about the people that have contributed to my life and what those things are, my family and my friends, and why those experiences and those people, those connections have all contributed to my success and to my stumbles and to how I overcome my obstacles. And I ultimately, you know, I'm going to be talking more on maybe on the next episode about my military service and how that felt like, you know, what it was like being, you know, a Latino in the service. Interestingly enough, I'm, you know, Puerto Rican, and there aren't many that I know of, many Puerto Rican, you know, all-source intelligence analysts or intel analysts or MI guys or, you know, information operations planners or cybersecurity folks. Like it's not something you see every day, and that's caused, you know, that's caused me to have to fight for certain job positions and fight, you know, to you know, make a name for myself, because people, you know, they don't think of you as that. And so it's an added obstacle, but I've overcome that obstacle in a lot of senses, and hopefully I've changed people's perspective, and they don't just think, oh, Puerto Rican that's doing computer stuff, that doesn't make sense. And yeah, you know, there are lots of us that are smart, and we don't have to settle for, you know, what we're thrown. Like we can forge our own paths. And I'm really, really grateful for the people that have been in my life, and I'm grateful for all of my friends. I'm glad that I had this opportunity to let this out. I feel like I really needed to. And I'm probably going to, you know, maybe revisit this subject, Veterans Day or Memorial Day or whatnot. But I wanted to say thank you for this, you know, thank you for your service. Thank you for, you know, listening to this. Thank you for supporting these endeavors. And if you supported if you're from a military family, or, you know, you have supported somebody in the military, if you've said thank you for your service to someone, thank you for yours. Thank you for the support. Because whenever somebody says thank you for your service, I years ago I didn't know how to respond to that. Now I've learned, I say thank you for the support, because it means everything. Military families are difficult, and the spouses and the children, they deal with a lot, and it's significant, and those people deserve recognition as well. And you know, service wouldn't be service if it wasn't about the people that you're serving. So everybody who felt that, thank you so much, and I appreciate you. And if anybody has any questions, I'm more than willing to respond to that. And I hope you enjoyed this, because I enjoyed speaking about it, and I enjoyed, you know, going this. It feels like I started with a particular subject and kind of went off. Like it was initially just the initial joining story, and then it became something else, which I guess is what the whole point of this long form format. But thank you for taking the time to listen to this, and let me know if this was valuable to you, and if you thought that this was something I should continue to share. And again, keep an eye out for my book. I'm going to be putting up more information on that soon. And make sure that you follow this podcast, Latin Experience, and that you also follow on YouTube. We have the Latin Experience on YouTube, at Latin Experience, and Paul Cruz on YouTube, and follow me on Instagram and Twitter or whatever. I got some stuff. Anyway, you can find me. You know my name, and you know, type in Latinx Experience. It's there. Don't worry about it. And that's it. Thank you. Appreciate you. And